Hi, everybody. It's Nancy Reyes with For Your Canine.
And Joanne Soike with For Better, For Worse.
And Lisa Bataska with Canine Defined.
Hi, everybody. We are so excited to have this guest with us today. We got to meet her and I know you've heard us talk about it in the last few weeks, at the Resilience Rainbow workshop that we went to in Wisconsin a few weeks ago. And we had such a good time that I was um, really excited to have her on and talk a little bit more about it because I think the information that we got and that we learned was really great. So I wanted to kind of bring it to you guys to kind of see what you guys think. And I'm sure, hi Ronnie, and I'm sure that you guys are going to enjoy it as well. There's so much information you're going to be like mind blown because we did when we when we were there. This we today we have Bobbie Bramby.
Bambry.
Bambry
Yeah.
with us today. She is one of the uh, co-founders or developers,
Co-creators.
co-creators
Yeah.
of the Resilience Rainbow, and that is a really wonderful. They've put together a lot of information, and they've just put it in this wonderful package that I think is going to it's going to change dog training a little bit, and hopefully, if everybody's open to it, you guys are gonna learn a lot tonight about it. And so the Resilience Rainbow. Bobby can probably elaborate a little bit more. Is basically how to help dogs kind of get through things or whatever. And they also are using it in performance sports, which I think is going to be fabulous. And that was actually what piqued our interest quite a lot because we do, as you know, at For Your Canine, we do a lot of performance. Lisa and Joanne's too, a lot of performance work, and Lisa and we all do a lot of behavior consultations and all that. So it's useful for all of the above, right? So Bobbie, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll start getting started, rolling with all the information.
Sure. So I'm a certified dog behavior consultant. So I'm a trainer, behavior consultant. I work for a company called Behavior Vets. It's a veterinary behavior practice. So we have veterinary behaviorists. So think of them as psychiatrists for the dog world. And we also have behavior consultants. So think of them as the psychologists of the dog world, or basically the animal world. Not we don't see just dogs. We have folks that specialize in cats and exotics and zoo, and it's just pretty amazing the diversity of our team and their skill sets. And I've been working as a trainer for, I'd say, over 20 years. I've been a behavior consultant, I'd say, for at least 15 years. And I am into dog sports. I'm addicted to agility. I've been doing it for over 20 years. And I absolutely love it. In fact, I was there today, just like I think like half of us were, or more than 3/4 of us were at a dog sport event today.
Yeah.
Because it is the weekend. This is what we do
Yes,
on the weekends.
right.
Yeah. And I've been with the company for, I think, 5 years now. And I started out in the shelter world. So I spent many years learning about behavior and learning about how to support dogs living within the stress of the shelter environment. My first job was at the ASPCA when they were a very small, not-for-profit organization just in New York City, not the kind of global or national company that they are, organization that they are now. And so our focus was always like, how do we support them in sort of just dealing with the shelter environment? How do we make their lives better while they're there and staying like mentally healthy until adopted and physically healthy until adopted? So I got to really experience, in the trenches of like what stress can do to the dog and how to support them in that situation. And there's only so much that you can do when you have limited resources, or you even have all the resources that you need, but the population is just so vast and the environment is so challenging. So I think right off the get-go, before I even knew the word resilience, I was learning about it hands-on just through observation and trial and error and working with some behavior folks that were, doing this a lot longer than I was at the time. And it's been an incredible journey. It's like really, I'd say the Resilience Rainbow conversation has been truly 20 years in the making. Kathy and I, Dr. Kathy Murphy, she's the co-creator. She's a neuroscientist, a veterinary surgeon. She lives in the UK. She earned her PhD, her DVM, and all of her studies was in the UK. And she also works for behavior vets now. And she and I met, I'd say 11 or 12 years ago. And right off the bat, again, we were talking about resilience without even knowing we were talking about resilience. And then just in our own lives, we met at a time in our lives where we were kind of just shifting things and reevaluating things and creating newly, because we were coming out of some difficult situations, and we happened to meet at that time. And also because she's a veterinarian and she was really into rescue, and she was on the board for, the major Rottweiler rescue in the UK. So she had many Rottweilers, and her work was all about ethics. She did a lot of work for the research field to better the care and the life for the animals that they did research on, just in terms of making sure that their welfare was at the forefront. And so she did a lot of work in that field for the UK as well. So we talked about stress. We talked about resilience all that time. I struggled with a few of my dogs and clients. She struggled with a couple of her dogs along the way that she adopted Nancy, a Rottweiler. I love that she named her Nancy. And she she was found as a stray from Romania. And so she had her transported to the UK. And she had a lot of trauma and a lot of behavior issues. So again, we really explored that conversation because there was no training a dog that was coming out of that level of trauma. There's no teaching them, don't jump on the couch, don't,
Right.
out here, don't take stuff off the counter, sit, stay, come when called, don't be in the there was none of the dog was so traumatized, had some significant fear and aggression, and really needed support to feel safe and secure. And that's, I think, between her dealing with Nancy and then my own dog, Marvel, who thankfully he is only 7.5 pounds, where Nancy is a lot bigger than Rottweiler. And I was, doing agility with him. We were both having conversations around resilience without really using that word at the time. But looking at, just working within the operant model wasn't enough for Marvel. He needed more. And then working in the operant model for Nancy was just not possible at that time because she did not feel safe and secure, because she did not trust. So there's no skill teaching at that point.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's so great that you mention it, because I know we talk about it pretty often about every training model is it works at some level for some dogs, but not for all. Mm-hmm. And I know early on as a young trainer, when we started, remember, Lisa, we were like, what are we doing wrong? Because we can't get this, we can't get these dogs to do, learn these things. And it's because they were so damaged or traumatized or had so many issues that was just not going to work. We had to look elsewhere. So that's why we've, like you and Joanne and all three of us also come from a rescue or shelter background. Mm-hmm. And it's the same, right? You're like, why they can't, they're not, it's not possible for them to. And then you see these people trying to just use the that operant model. Mm-hmm. To, not that there's anything wrong with it, but yeah, there's so much other stuff you have to do before to be able to get them to be in a place where they're going to be learning and be able to be in that safe space. And we always talk about that safety is number one, right? Mm-hmm. Dogs don't feel safe and they're not sure, then learning is going to be, well, and that's true for all animals, not only dogs
and people, right? All animals, including humans. Yeah,
including humans. Yep. So it's one of those things that we stress a lot about. So tell us a little bit. What is the resilience rainbow? What I mean?
Yeah. I put a couple links in our private chat, including an article to a journal that we wrote for the IAABC, which is a major organization in the States as well. I mean, it has sort of, I think, like satellite groups in other countries around the world. Their focus is behavior work for all species. And so we wrote about the Resilience Rainbow, the framework, if people want to check it out there, because we really dive into the neuroscience behind it and the domains. We don't give case examples, but we do talk about really what it is, what each domain is. So, and you'll see a graphic. That's the other thing. You'll see a graphic for it. And so the Resilience Rainbow, we decided to call it a rainbow because we discovered through looking at the human literature, looking at the research, not just for humans, but other species as well. Not as much for dogs, like pet dogs, but definitely applicable to dogs, looking at other species. We've kept coming back to these 7, now we're calling them domains, as being the ones that made the most sense. Now, that doesn't mean there's not more than 7 potentially to support building and supporting resilience, or resilience conditioning, as we're calling it. And think of it like conditioning, like working out in a gym and building muscle, not counter conditioning or classical conditioning or operant conditioning. It's like you're basically working out your nervous system so that your nervous system has an easier time bouncing back from stressors, and becomes more resistant to stressors. And a stressor is not necessarily just a bad thing, like being stuck in traffic when you're late to an appointment, right? Or dealing with a work deadline and there's like a big project and you're working with your team. A stressor could be like, when I got married, I felt all the nerves. And I was really excited. Like, I wasn't nervous. I was just so excited that my nervous system was out of control. I was so happy and excited to see like all the people that I care about. Because like, when do you get all the people that you love in one space from like wherever they are in the world? It doesn't happen unless you're getting married or you die. So like,
Exactly.
to have everyone in one space. So to, it could be something, I went to an agility trial. Like, that's a lot of fun, but there's stressors. So we're thinking, when we say stress, we're just basically saying, we're looking at it through the lens of the activation of the nervous system. And so could it be sometimes negative and feel heavy? Like my mother-in-law has Alzheimer's, and there was a time for a number of years where we were a caregiver for her, and that was heavy, and that was hard, and that was sad, and that was very stressful. But also, there's fun things that happen that activate the nervous system. So they are considered stressors as well. So we're looking at how to support the nervous system in kind of dealing with life and the stressors that come with life, whether they're positive or negative. And so the domains that kept coming up for us were 7. And because they were these 7, we thought, well, the 7 colors of the rainbow. And Kathy is brilliant. So she was the one that's like, let's call it Resilience Rainbow because there's 7 colors in the rainbow and we have 7 domains. And it made a lot of sense because it's like a great memory aid, right?
Yeah, right.
And it's kind of fun and hopefully keeps it light and it's not heavy for people. And we're calling it a framework because it's not necessarily, there's so many exercises and techniques that can work within one or more of these domains. So it's more about looking at, when I'm working with a dog or any species for that matter, am I making sure that in this program or in the way that I'm raising them or in the way that I'm caring for them, am I meeting all of these domains across the board? And a number of exercises and skill sets and techniques and tools could fall into one or more of those domains. So there's a lot of flexibility there, which is why we really liked it as well as we were creating this, because there are many professionals out there that have created incredible techniques like Leslie McDevitt and her pattern games that support this work, right? So then there's Grisha Stewart with BAT, behavior adjustment training. There's so many different techniques that can actually fall. We were talking about Susan Clothier, like her tree program. So many of these techniques can fall into one of these domains. So there's flexibility for people to have a very large toolbox and see what works for the dog in front of them on that day in a particular context. And so the domains that we found made the most sense for our framework are decompression, safety and security, completing the stress cycle, mental and physical well-being, predictability, social support, and agency. And if people click on that link for the article, they'll see the graphic, and then they'll see the domains. And so when I work with my clients now, ever since we created this framework last year, it was like a year ago, I'm always looking at, well, with this particular client, what's missing? What do they need right now? What's the most important thing if they're a client coming to me for the first time? And then as it evolves, like, what else do I need to look at? What's missing? And when I look at the techniques that I'm choosing for a particular client, like, for example, I have a client who is aggressive towards unfamiliar people, and it's rooted in fear, essentially, and anxiety. And so one of the things that we're doing is target stick training, right? So like target stick, right? Mm-hmm. So the game is eventually anyone who holds this target stick, the dog knows the game, right? And so that falls under the domain of predictability, right? So that's kind of how I'm always looking at the framework in terms of, where does this make sense for the dog? What can I do to support the dog in better understanding, having more clarity, feeling more at ease? And same in dog sports. Like, there's so many games that, I've worked with the Brain Camp crew that have been created to support the dog working within this resilience rainbow framework. And Tracy Sklenar, who's like, I would call her the leader of our Brain Camp crew, is really brilliant at taking concepts in theory and creating games out of them. And so she's created a number of games that support predictability, support social support, like these domains. And so that's why she's really loved this framework, because it's given her sort of, I'm not saying boundaries, but kind of like a trajectory of saying, right, like, this is where we're headed, this is what we're looking for, and this is how I can neurobiologically build and support resilience. And then systematically weaving in the games and folding in more distractions, increasing criteria, making it more challenging, growing the game so that they can eventually get into the trial environment. If you're doing dog sports, whether it's obedience, rally, scent work, agility, fly ball.
Right.
I'd say.
Yeah, because that's really, that's one of the things, like, some people really enjoy the dog sport, whatever that dog sport is. But the dog has some issues with, especially agility is, so fast moving and very, just exciting for a lot of dogs. So it's, as a matter of fact, I just did a consult with somebody who having a border collie that just gets over aroused and just trying to figure that stuff out. And some of the stuff that we talked about was some of the pattern, the predictability to help him deal with that environment.
That's awesome.
Even though he's, once he's working and doing agility, he's fantastic. It's the before and after situation that becomes an issue. So
get it.
Yep. And so she was pretty happy with our discussion, and it was easy. A lot of the games and stuff are pretty easy to implement for her. And she's probably an addict like you. She goes to classes 3 days a week, and
Oh wait, I do not. I cannot manage that. Wow, I wish.
yeah, I know she goes 3 days a week. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay,
I get to go once a week.
yeah.
On my one day off, yeah.
Yep, that's it. Yeah, the dog trainers get to go, once.
We're working the rest of the time. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But no, she's a pretty heavy duty competitor, and she has this lovely border collie that just gets over the top a little bit, and it happens mostly in agility. So yeah,
agility is exciting.
It is very exciting.
Yeah. So when you talk about, let me talk about the resilience and bouncing between the domains. And providing the importance, and I don't know, because we didn't really talk about the pattern games, but the reason for the pattern games is to help the dogs provide predictability, safety and security, stuff like that, correct? Can you kind of delve a little bit into that piece of it?
Sure. So what we've learned about, if you think about predictability in terms of neuroscience, and I'm not a neuroscientist, my best friend is. So I get to have a lot of really cool conversations with her about neuroscience. So I joke that I'm like an honorary neuroscientist, but not really. But I can tell you as a practitioner, I have a decent understanding of what makes sense for our dogs after working with her or having these conversations for so many years, and then really looking at the framework to make sure it makes sense based on what's happening in the brain and what's happening in the body. So the brain is always looking for patterns, period. And that's about survival. That's about safety and security, right? And so if the patterns are, if we can provide patterns for them while the dog is in an unpredictable environment, and that's one of the things that Leslie talked about, Leslie McDevitt, who created a very specific set of pattern games. She's coined the phrase pattern games. And there's so many other kinds of ways to create patterns, to create ritualized experiences. In my behavior work that I do with my pet clients, pet guardians, we're looking to ritualize a lot of things when we're dealing with fear or aggression, phobias. And so there's that aspect of it. Because if the dog sees, okay, X happens, then Y happens, that always equals C. And we always do it this way, and we always do it this way, they start to sort of trust the process. So I create sort of a ritualized experience with meeting new people, unfamiliar people, with a lot of my behavior clients who have a fear of unfamiliar people or fear aggression of unfamiliar people. And what starts to happen is, because they trust the process and they know that these games lead to this every single time, over time, they start to warm up to people faster, have more people come in, you can get them into the club, things like that. I worked with one Boston Terrier on and off for 3 years. And because of moving and different things, he had to have a number of different dog walkers. And so because of that, we created this guest protocol. And then over time, now they're living in Florida. I'm no longer working with them, but we stay in touch. We're Facebook friends. And he's doing so well. He still has some issues, but she still follows the protocol when she had to hire the new dog walker, and it worked really, really well. And then when you're looking at dog sports specifically, and the games that are about pattern games, like Leslie McDevitt's pattern games, dog sports in general, in some respects, the dog enters the context, a trial environment, a competition environment, and knows what's going to happen for the most part. And they can feel unsure because there's so many things that are different, little pieces that feel different moment to moment. The dogs are not always in the same place. The judge is not always in the same place. The people around the ring, the other competitors, are not always in the same place, right? The energy of the space, the venues that we go to, the footing, right? There's so many things that can be different. And so if we can provide some kind of predictability, and this is where the neuroscience comes in, over time, these pattern games can help change brainwave frequencies so that so it gets them into a more regulated, like a little bit of a calmer state. It can really support an arousal management, emotional regulation. Typically, you do need to do some work ahead of time. Think of it like installing apps to your phone, right? You can't just show up in the moment without Wi-Fi, like trying to use the app. Yeah, you need to like set it up in advance and be familiar with it before you actually use it in different situations. So it's the same with these games. It's really supportive to the dog if you can play these games and practice these games and like weave in distractions and challenging situations over time, depending on the dog. And then looking from moment to moment, what makes the most sense in that situation in terms of the game that you choose to use or how you choose to move with the dog. And that's just one domain and like one sort of set of games that fall within that domain. There's so much more to predictability than just the pattern games. Oh, you're muted,
You're
Nancy.
muted.
Sorry. Yeah, my husband was coughing, so I didn't want to hear that. One of the pattern games that we've used pretty regularly is the 1, 2, 3, and that has been extremely helpful for dogs that have reactivity issues with other dogs, where they've worked to a certain point, the activity where they can be a little bit more comfortable, but it helps them in that unpredictable environment, like coming like at our facility. It's big and there's a lot of doors and a lot of dogs walking around, so sometimes they can get surprised. So the 1, 2, 3 has been very, very helpful for a couple of our client dogs that they've been using it effectively, and it's been super helpful. Could you talk a little bit about what that game is? Because I could probably not do it as much justice as you can, but it's why it works so well, in that predictability piece.
Yeah, I definitely would love to have Leslie here, but she's if she could talk about these are her games. But I'll say this about the 1, 2, 3 game is that it's a predictable count, right? So you're 1, 2, and if people are interested in learning more about the pattern games, I recommend getting Leslie McDevitt's book called Control Unleashed.
Yep.
Reactive to Relaxed. If you guys have the link handy. So and then her Facebook page is called Friends of Controlled Unleashed. And there's a lot of great trainers on that Facebook page that regularly utilize her pattern games in different situations, whether it's dog sports or behavior work or training or puppy training. I think where Dr. Kathy Murphy and I take it a little further, or maybe just give it in a different way, is that we're looking at it through the domains of the resilience rainbow. And so when you can provide predictability, it again can help regulate arousal. It can help with regulating emotions, like modulating emotions. And there's a count, right? So you're saying 1, 2, 3, you're giving a treat. 1, 2, 3, you're giving a treat. You can slow the count. You can speed up the count. The number of steps that you take, it doesn't matter within the count.
Correct.
And just doing that, right? So I have a puppy, he's 7 months old, and we went to a venue that he's never been to, and it's an indoor facility, and it's not a lot of space where where people are milling about and waiting to go run. And that is he's like super excited, and he's barking and he wants to visit the dogs. So, and I knew that he would be that way. So one of the things that I did is, as we were walking into the building, I was already proactively supporting him by doing the 1, 2, 3 game, which he knows. And so I was 1, 2, 3, gave him a piece of chicken, 1, 2, 3, gave him a piece of chicken as we walked into the building. And as we walked into the space where the ring is, it was like, about, I'd say like 15 feet, you make a right, another few feet. Now you're in the building, you're in the main ring area where everyone's competing. There's some crating, but there's not a lot of space to maneuver. So he has to walk by, and he loves people and dogs, but he's also, so when he's excited, he just barks about everything. So he's also managing walking past people, walking past dogs.
Mhm.
That wasn't the prettiest sight because he definitely was like, oh my God. But he kept coming back to me on the 3 count. And he's practicing like dividing his attention to what's happening over here, back to me, what's happening over there, back to me. Now, my other dog is 3 years old. Actually, today, Funky's his birthday, 3 years old. I can do the 1, 2, 3 count into any space. And he's the whole time he's on me, but he's 3 years old and we've practiced it a lot.
Mhm.
So the other beautiful thing about these games is that, if you just keep practicing it, it's just more tools to support the dog into different situations. And when you're doing dog sports, you really want to find like that optimal state of arousal for that dog so that when you go in, you can have, you're at peak performance for that dog, right? Holding a sit stay, hitting the contacts, hitting the weave poles, staying in the weave poles, things like that. Listening to your cues when you're doing agility. With fly ball, like you don't chase the other dogs.
Yeah, right.
Keep the ball in your mouth, things like that.
Yeah.
The timing of going, the timing of hitting, doing the box turn. I don't know much about the other sports that are out there, but there's all qualities and pieces that you have to think about, that the dog has so much more to manage than we do, right? So much more. So wherever we can proactively support them in getting into like the right state of mind for that sport we're competing, like that's the better that they do typically. And it builds on it because it's neurobiology. It's not only operant. Operant is one piece of it. Operant is like consequential learning, right?
Mhm.
Transactional learning. That's one piece of it. There's also like, you're literally like rewiring the brain is what I tell people, which is pretty incredible through this process.
And that's the most challenging because it takes time.
It takes
and
a long time.
Takes a long time and a lot of repetition. That's why
A lot of repetition.
well, what I like about the games is they're pretty easy for most people to follow.
Yeah. And you don't need a lot of space and you don't need a lot of tools.
Yep. And that for me, because that's a big challenge, right? When you're trying to give a client things to do, sometimes if there's too complex or they require too much planning and this and that, it just becomes overwhelming for them.
Yeah.
So, because that's the thing for those of us who are working with, training dogs or you want to make sure they can actually do what you're asking them so that their dog does get better and improve. So it's wonderful when these games are so simple that it's really easy for them to follow. And they are also amazed, like, oh, that's it. It's like, yes, that's it. And that's all you have to work on. And they're like, oh yeah, we could do that. And they're doing it, which is really awesome.
Yeah. I worked in New York City. I worked in New York City. So an urban environment where it's really challenging. Right. And so, I in the last year that I worked there, so now I'm in Southern New Jersey and I only work virtually, or I see some clients in person where I live around my area. So the last time I was working in New York City, I'd say I was still going up there in 2021.
Oh, wow.
I was still like driving up there like twice a week. And then I'd spend the whole day just like back to back in-person clients. And at the time, I remember it was like still COVID and the vaccines were just coming out, but not everyone was getting vaccinated. So I would have back-to-back clients. We'd meet at the park. And that's when I really started to explore pattern games in urban environments. And I said, like, if all else fails, just do the 1, 2, 3 game. Or if all else fails, do the up and down game, right? Like, it's a very simple, this is what you do, versus trying to think about like just your traditional counter conditioning kind of work where you're trying to associate like, here, you're getting chicken when this dog passes and the timing. I'm like, listen, just do that, go, right? It's so much easier than thinking about things conceptually for the client who's not trained in our field, right? They happen to get a dog and, oh crap, there's some issues.
Go ahead, Joanne.
So, yeah, hitting on that that, right? I think that's where this stuff starts, right? Like we all want to shape our puppies, but let's be fair, lots of people don't come until there's issues already on the table, right? Meaning the dog has already gone through and practiced behaviors and this and that. And so when we went to the seminar, you had a really great analogy that I'm hoping you can share again, which was kind of about your machete in the forest, right? And your two paths. It made a lot of, and it made a lot of sense to me. So can you kind of talk about, the neuroscience of what the brain likes and then how to change it a little bit?
Right. So I tried to explain. So the way that I understood neural pathways in the brain is like thinking about like hiking trails, right? There's think of a practiced behavior that's sort of just part of the dog's repertoire, right? So let's say it's barking and lunging at other dogs. And so you have this well-worn, well-traveled hiking trail, right? And so it's you show up, it is so clear that that's the path because everything is trampled down, everything is cleared, like you can see the path. But now you have this other way that you could go, but it's completely grown over. The grass is tall, like you don't really even see a path, like there maybe never was a path, but you're going to create a new path, and that's just how it's going to go. And that's what I said, like you take the machete and you like chop all the branches out of the way and you trample down the grass, and you just do this over and over and over and again every day, and you never go the other way anymore. And so what starts to happen is that path becomes grown over, maybe a tree downs, no one clears it, and now over time this new path becomes the obvious path. So now my friend shows up, my friend's like, oh, we're going to go right because that's the path that I see now, versus the other way left that's completely grown over. And that's what can happen over time for the dog if you keep working in this different direction. Now, that doesn't mean that like, oh, my dog will never bark and lunge at other dogs. But what the dog will have the ability to do is make different decisions because of neural pathways, like cope with things differently. The Rottweiler that I showed in the seminar presentation, the case study we explored, she continues to improve. I still meet with her every week, and it's incredible to see her recovery, how fast, like she'll still have the explosion in certain situations, the big eruptive bark. She's a Rottweiler anyway, right? There is the guardian breed specific behavior you can expect of it. And it doesn't ruin her day anymore, right? Like she just she'll bark and lunge, and then really quickly she gets over it. And then she goes and plays with her ball, and then she can go in the house and it's like nothing happened. Whereas in the past, her whole day, she would startle, she would, so that's a massive improvement in the dog's quality of life, as well as the guardian's quality of life.
So that's what you're referring to when you're talking about the resilience, right? The ability to bounce back at a quicker rate.
Yeah.
On the change of the neural pathways.
Yeah. And if she does, and she doesn't, there's been a couple of situations where she's seen dogs beyond the gate and she didn't bark. And we're like, did she see that dog or not? But there's a very real chance that she did. And for whatever reason, it wasn't an issue for her. And so, that's about the neural pathways, and, there will be, we have to balance it with the breed specific behaviors, for how many generations she's been bred to be a Rottweiler, and they guard. And that's part of why we, humans have bred that breed in that way. But it's so massive that she can just get over it and then go do something else, like lay down. Like she couldn't lay down ever before and just relax. So that's, and it, or in the house, if there was a sort of an eruptive reaction, the rest of the day, maybe even a few days, she would startle at every noise, she would bark. And now she doesn't do that anymore. And that's incredible. Mm-hmm. And that's about the neural pathways, that there's nothing, it's not like her mom she would hear a sound, the dog would bark, and then her mom would start training, right? And in the house, they live in an urban area, so they're hearing people go by and dogs going by. And she used to bark at birds chirping would set her off. Like that
Wow.
doesn't happen anymore, which is incredible.
Wow. So because that's I think what people miss, like that, how long it takes to help, the process takes a while,
Yeah.
because it's no different than us trying to develop a new habit.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. Now, sometimes medication is necessary to support the process.
Absolutely. Yep.
Medication, but it really is like I'm learning how to surf, and so I was listening to a neuroscience podcast, which I'm like loving. It's called I'm going to look it up. I can't remember the neuroscientist's name. Let me just pull it up because I'm loving this podcast now. It's called the Inner Cosmos with David Eagleman, and you can get it on Spotify or Apple or whatever.
The Inner Cosmos.
Yeah, the Inner Cosmos, and so it's incredible because, like he was talking about on the episode I listened today, he was talking about how the brain can actually sort of rewire itself to then adjust to whatever changes that have happened to the body. So, for example, they were talking about this is going to sound like creepy and totally off topic, but essentially, like they can like if they put sort of certain like computer chips or whatever, I can't remember what they were called, like into the brain, you can by through thinking you can control a robot essentially. Like
Yes.
thinking. So it's like another limb is what they were like talking about. He was exploring this whole conversation around like that experience. But essentially, and then he was talking about babies, which blew my mind. Like what they're doing when they're babbling is practicing like baby babbling.
Yeah.
Practicing talking. And they're making noises. And then their brain is basically taking that information, taking in whatever's happening around them, like the parents talking to them, the
Sure.
siblings, whatever. And then over time, so the brain is wiring. And then eventually the baby can actually start making those sounds that sound like words.
Right.
And so it's the same thing as like when they're moving and they're like hitting their head and they're poking their eye. And then eventually they have motor coordination. So the same, and I was thinking about that and I was like, oh, that's me learning how to surf. Like over time, if I keep
Yes.
practicing, it becomes, my brain rewires so that I can balance, so that I can have, like, this is more than me just working out and doing push-ups. So I have strength to like push myself up onto the surfboard. This is the brain. Like I can't consciously learn how to balance myself while the wave keeps changing and moving. Like that just happens. That's the brain rewiring itself. So I just thought like that's amazing to think of things that way.
And that's why, well, and going back to that too, it's like dogs that have been in rescue or whatever that have had a history, rewiring that brain is harder. And as we get older, trying to learn new things takes a little bit longer.
It takes a little longer, especially if you don't regularly expose your brain to novel experiences.
Right.
That's a big part of it as well. As what I've been learning is that the more you expose yourself to novel experiences, the plasticity, the ability to change your brain, it's like a little easier on the brain. It can still happen regardless, but it's but the idea of exposing to novel experience is positive, right? You don't want to like go out there and ruin your life and have bad things happen if you can help it.
It's like, I'm going to try, well, and Joanne and I, and we were talking about Tango. No, we're talking about what we did when we were younger.
Oh.
And it's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Your brain is clearly not developed at that age. So, and it's like, you'd never do half of that stuff nowadays. But I think it is kind of a way of our brains just learning different things and what works and what doesn't. And luckily we live to tell about it and stuff.
Yes.
Yes. So yeah, that's very helpful. I was going to ask, on some of the pattern games, progression seems to be a problem. Stop doing that. Tends to be a problem progressing. Like like the 1, 2, 3, where you're going to initially you teach it at home, but then you eventually take it on the road and all that. And I think a lot of people, that's why I think a lot of people get stuck, right? The progression, like when to progress, when's okay to expose the dog to more. Um, so, and I'll be honest, I try to think like what, I usually tell people when the dog is doing this in this particular environment, in this particular situation, very easily, and he's doing it about 90 to 100% of the time, then it's time to move on and
Mhm.
make it more challenging. But people have a little challenge. They're a little challenged to be able to do that, right? They're like, oh, they're not sure whether to progress, or in some cases they go a little too fast. So what are
Yeah.
some of the ways you help folks with that? Because that's really hard for me anyway. It's like, okay, when they're doing this 100%. So, and it's trial and error in many cases. Like
Yeah.
they're really good. And some people tend to, well, okay, well, now we're going to go to instead of coming into a small building, they're going to go into a big, massive, it's like, no,
Yeah.
you can't make that leap.
Yeah.
You can't get through, you can't build that neural pathway, just bulldozing your way through that, right?
Right, exactly. It's, it'll just grow over real fast. Um, I I'm working with a dog right now, a client right now, and we're working pattern games. The dog is reactive to a lot of things, and so I give her really specific steps, and I'll say, okay, well, like for example, just practice the 1, 2, 3 game for this week in your house and in your backyard. Okay, week 2, you're just going to practice it in the front yard, but you're going to practice it. And she lives in a suburban area, but there's activity, right? It's
Yeah.
it's residential, and so you're just going to practice it in the front yard for this week. During the quieter times of the neighborhood that you think, like, so for her right now it's early morning, and then hopefully next week we're doing it at slightly busier times. So and then I'll say to her what I've said to her, because I don't really make it about like percentages, because I think that's
Yes.
where, like, you have to be a professional to really understand. So I'll say what I've said to her is, I said, listen, if you're doing the game, like the up and down game, for example, and you're noticing that your dog is not able to easily split her attention between whatever's happening out there and you, then that means you're too close. So I'll
Right.
talk specifically about the behavior of the dog. And they'll say, okay, if that happens, no big deal. Or if she barks and lunges because you didn't see the guy come by in a bike, no big deal. Just move 20 steps back, like move closer to your house. So I'll give them like very specific steps to follow. But if she's doing, she's able to split her attention, and the bike happens to go by and nothing happens, she just looks and comes back to you, stay where you are, you're great.
Right.
And I'll often say to people, I'll have them work the skill longer than they might think
Right.
to, right? So I'll say, do that depending on the severity of the issue or the dog's learning history and the age of the dog, like all the things that we're looking at. If they're on medication, how long have they been on medication? What have they done before?
Sure.
Is there any punitive training in the past? What level, like what degree? All of that I take all of that into consideration when I make a plan, and I'll say, okay, so with this client, I've said to her 1 week doing X, then 1 week doing Y, and then we keep growing, building it, especially now that the meds are working for her. But there was a time that I said, okay, before her meds started working, I was like, okay, for 3 weeks, you're just doing this, and we're just going to keep practicing it for the sake of practicing it, and you're not doing it in any new situation.
Right.
Right. And so it's so specific to that student or that client,
Right.
based on what we're, and all of the other parameters that I've just described.
Right. Yeah, because some people tend to, well, and not all. Some of them are very good about following direction, and they do exactly what you tell them, so it's nice and easy. And then
Yeah.
some that get a little overzealous, and I'm like, no.
Yeah. And I'll say,
Yeah.
like, if there's I worked with one student, and I said, she tried to do the 1, 2, 3 game, walking past like his favorite people, and he lunged at them and then came back to her, lunged at them and came back to her. And I said, okay, well, that's a very clear indication. So if you see that he can walk with you and look and come back to you, then you're fine. But if he lunges, if he like is standing on his back 2 feet because he's trying to go visit people,
Right.
then that means you're too close. So I'll give them like very specific behaviors and body language to observe, because she didn't think that it was too close because he kept coming back to her.
Yeah.
Right.
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 And I said, no, that's too close because of these reasons.
Right.
Right.
So yeah, trying to decipher it and reading the dog, because that's the hard part, right? For a lot of folks, right? Being able
Yeah.
to, it's like, it's not quite what we wanted. But yeah, usually I try to, like give them like goals, like do this and do that. And a lot of them are great. Like they're like, and that's a good point. Like just make them do it longer than they need.
Because it's about the neural pathways. And that's something that really changed for me when I started looking at it through the lens of neuroscience versus, operant. Like that's one piece of the puzzle.
Right. Which is really, really helpful. So what was I was going to ask?
Well, I have a question for Bobbie. Can you talk about, I thought it was interesting, right? When we had gone to see you guys, the question I had in Wisconsin had to do with the difference between, the decompression and completing the stress cycle. Can you kind of speak to those domains based upon the resilience rainbow?
Oh
yeah. Yeah. So it can feel like they're the same.
Mm-hmm.
So decompression, it's about the HPA axis. So that's the hypothalamus, adrenal pituitary glands, like the axis, like all of that connected. And that's really what is activated when the body is stressed or something is happening. The nervous system is stressed because it's preparing the body to then address the stressor, whether if it's life-threatening or whatever's needed, right? Whatever's needed in that moment, or maybe to go run a race or, swim or like whatever it is that you're doing. For me, it's surfing. It's like getting my body ready to, like, I went surfing yesterday and the waves were pretty big and it was really hard to get out past the breaking waves to get to a place where I could actually surf. But you've got to like get yourself psyched up to maybe get smashed a few times and like having the waves to get out, right? But there's like my nervous system is activated to get me into the right place to be like really aware and really alert and paying attention and not distracted, right? But that takes energy, that takes effort. And then afterwards, when your body is activated, it needs to decompress, because if it's constantly activated and constantly stressed, you have chronic stress. And if you have chronic stress over time, the science tells us, medicine tells us that it will lead to disease and illness. Like mental health, physical health, injuries. Like if you're doing dog sports and the dog is chronically stressed, and that doesn't mean that they're scared all the time, but maybe they're trained every single weekend and they're not really given opportunities throughout the week to decompress, right? So that can lead to injuries, things like that. And that's not necessarily, it doesn't always mean that they're overdoing the sport. It just means that they need to do things to support the brain and the body over time, over a period of time.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah. So decompression is bringing the activity level down. It could be a little, it could be a lot. But really completing the stress cycle is you're bringing it all the way down to baseline. So the body has been activated, wherever that baseline is, it's bringing it back down, completing that stress cycle.
So would you say that's like a good comparison would be kind of working out? You have to do a warm up, right? So that's your decompression to get your body into the right place to be able to perform whatever exercise properly. And then there's a cool down after.
I would say the cool down is kind of the decompression.
Okay.
Is what you're doing. Yeah. The warm up is like preparing the body to do the workout, and then you're doing the workout. So that might be doing the things that you need to do to rev yourself up to prepare both physically and mentally to do the workout or to like run the course. You have a warm up routine with your dog, both physical, you physically get them warmed up to run the sequence and agility or run the course. And then maybe you have some mental things that you do with the dog to get them into the zone. Right? It's all sports psychology.
Right.
and get them into the right state of arousal. Some dogs, you need to help them come up. Some dogs, you need to bring them down. Topper, I have to help him come up. He's my terrier. Funky, my border collie whippet, I have to bring him down. And then they get to their peak performance state of arousal to actually go in and perform as well as possible, as long as like I don't make mistakes. And if I do make mistakes, to be resilient to those mistakes and stay in the game with me. And then completing the stress cycle would be like, tomorrow we're going to go for a hike or a walk in the woods. Not really a hike, just like a walk in the woods, and they can just do whatever they want to do. And then potentially that will complete the stress cycle. Doing exercises like relaxation. There could be duration sniffing, just cuddling on the couch. There's so many things that can complete the stress cycle.
Yeah.
For a dog.
Well, and it's so funny because I too am like dealing with some health issues because of stress. So I'm in the process of learning how to complete the stress cycle and learning how to decompress and all those things. So I am knee deep in it at the moment for myself, because I tend to be a very type A. So taking it easy and relaxing is really, really challenging and hard. So it's very, it's so funny that it's like, it's all relatable to every animal because I'm going through the same.
It's so true. Read the book for yourself. Burnout, completing the cycle. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to put that link up. Book changed my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Mine too. Yeah. I tend to, I read it after I went to your,
the seminar.
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah. I also have it on audio as well. And I found it very, very helpful. When I'm feeling a little bit of, I just turn it on, and it really, it's very, very, it's really helped me a lot. And definitely it's helped me immensely as well, to complete my stress cycle.
It's true.
I can.
It's true. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I read it in COVID during like the shutdown, 2020 with COVID. So I was like, what can I do? Because I was very anxious and very stressed. I know like a lot of people were very insecure, right? So many questions, no real answers. And so I read that book and I started to do the things that they said to do.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I'm a little bit better, and I'm trying to, it's hard because again, building new neural pathways to be able to.
It takes time. It takes time.
It takes a lot of time. So, trying to change some things for myself. So you had some things, or this is a lot of information, you guys. A lot of kind of nerdy, geeky neuroscience stuff, but. It's something that is really important for in training, and I think it's been missing for a long time, right? Even though some of us are doing it, they're not really calling it that. And I think it's really important that we really look at the whole thing. It's not so simple, right? It's not. It is and it isn't, right? And just looking at it from a different lens is so critical and so helpful to be able to understand our dogs, because really what it's all about is what our dogs, how we can make their lives better, and how we can understand them better, because it's the relationship with an animal is no different than a human to human relationship. It's going to be great sometimes, and sometimes it's going to be some confusing things, right? So these are just some ways. And the problem is with animals, they don't speak our language and we don't speak theirs, so we have to kind of figure it out together this way. But this I think the Resilience Rainbow gives us some tools to be able to help them navigate our world, because they're in in our world, we're not in theirs, so it's so different. So tell us about some of the stuff you guys have coming up.
We have a lot of stuff coming up.
Yeah, you do. You do.
Yeah, thank you. So in December, we have 2 big events. So Brain Camp with Brain Camp Crew, that's dog sports. We're going to be in Julian, North Carolina, on December 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. And if you're interested, just follow my Facebook page, Bobbie Bhambee. I think you can probably put the link in the chat, because we don't have all the details settled yet in terms of registration. So if you follow my page, it'll come up. And then the following weekend, we're Dr. Kathy Murphy and I, and she'll be at Brain Camp as well. So she's part of the Brain Camp crew with Elliot Connor, who's a scent work instructor, a man trailing instructor, and then Tracy Sklenar, who's coached world teams for agility and has Agility University. And then Dr. Kathy Murphy and I work at Behavior Vets, and she's a neuroscientist veterinarian. And so we're going to be, we're doing Brain Camp. And then the following weekend, December 9th and 10th, I believe, Dr. Kathy Murphy and I will be in Asheville, North Carolina, doing a Resilience Rainbow seminar. And that is, it's dog sports folks can come to. It's more, I think it's more geared for behavior and training professionals. So we're going to be looking at case studies and exploring the framework and diving deep into the neurobiology and neuroscience of resilience in general. And then we shared a link about the article. And then if anyone's interested in learning more about resilience in general, including the Resilience Rainbow, you can go to, I think here it is, we can go to a link to purchase webinars that we have done for behavior vets, if you want to check that out.
They put that in there. Yeah, so everything's in the chat, you guys, that I'm in the comments. So you should be able to get them no matter where you're listening to us. Because I know, so Bobbie, just so you know, they're listening to it. And our audience is on my business page, my personal page, and Lisa's business page, her page, Joanne's personal page, and her business page. So wherever you're getting it, you should be.
Oh, there she is.
Sorry. Hey, one other thing I would love it if you just mentioned is all the webinars you guys do. I know I'm super duper interested in one coming up talking about spaying and neutering and really diving into that hard topic about what happens when.
Yeah, like whether to do it and what happens if you do it, and and if you're going to do it, what's the right time. And so Dr. Jessica Heckman and Dr. Kathy Murphy are exploring that together. Dr. Heckman is a geneticist. What is she called? What do I call her? I don't know if she's a geneticist, but she basically got her PhD in studying genetics, and she's also a veterinarian. So it's a very, very cool conversation. And Dr. Heckman has an amazing passion project called The Functional Dog. Yes. And it supports breeders and looking at what breeding could look like and ought to look like today, and getting the information out there so that we have mentally, emotionally, and physically healthy puppies that can go into pet homes.
Right.
And where can people find all those webinars, Bobbie?
The link is in the chat.
Yep, I put them all in the chat.
Yeah, it's
okay.
behaviorvets.mylearnworlds.com.
Yep.
And then the rest of the link is where you can find all the webinars. Thanks so much for mentioning that one, Joanne. That's coming up next month.
Yeah.
And then you also got a power patterns for peak performance.
Oh yeah, I totally forgot about that. Yeah, thank you. So that's coming up August 10th. Tracy Sklenar and I are doing a webinar called Power Patterns 2. So if you didn't get to see the first one, you won't miss anything if you just join us for part 2. And you can still purchase part 1, but the link, the form to register and information is in this link right here in this post.
Mm-hmm.
And join us. You'll learn more about pattern games, but we're taking the basic pattern games, 1, 2, 3 game, up and down, back and forth, Super Bowls. And we've just basically exponentially expanded them so that they can work for sports, and exploring the neuroscience about why we chose these games and how to build upon these games, so that eventually you can compete with your dogs and your dogs can manage their own arousal and they can manage their own emotions, and it's not a thing for them anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think this is where, um, I think this is such an important piece where they're able to do it on their own and be able to give them the tools to be able to navigate
Hmm.
what environment. And that's not to say that every dog is suited for every single dog sport, because sometimes
Yeah.
that's what it is. But having these additional tools is so helpful to be able to, give them the support they need and give them that ability to do all that stuff. And yeah, definitely. Now that, and this is so great. This is why I was so excited about this. Like, somebody that's bringing the training in to the dog sport world, because it seems like it's been two separate camps for so long, and it's a couple different worlds, but I just think that it's like, and that you don't have to do dog sports, but for those of us who are in it, it's really nice to have that balance. So you have everything, right? You have the mental, physical, and everything's working together. It's so nice to some things to talk about. Yeah, yeah. Michelle's like, oh, we got some things to talk about. So anyway, thank you, Bobbie, for coming on. This is so great. We could probably talk and talk and talk. But we are For Your Canine is going to have a brain camp in July. So
Of next year.
next year,
Not today's July 30th. No,
October. Yeah,
not tomorrow.
tomorrow. Yeah, because that would be tomorrow. Next year, and yeah, it's been really exciting for us to have, as we're, as our profession has evolved, that this is just a it's just a great, just wonderful to circle back to this
Yes.
piece where Lisa and I, we were training, we training together a long time, and just bringing it, learning all the stuff. And then Joanne comes into the picture, because we've known each other a very long time. So we've been working together, and we are lucky we have each other to bounce things off of. And
Yeah.
what do you think of this? And because it's hard sometimes, not, trying to figure things
Yeah.
out. Nobody has all the answers. We just do the best we can. So
I
Thank
really appreciate the whole the neuroscience behind it, right? Because you hear so much of the training and there's this and there's that, but to really understand the neuroscience behind it and why
Yeah.
it works is like amazing, right? Because it makes sense why. And we've always like the science part. I know Joanne and for Nancy, it's been so intriguing, and of course we geek out on it. So
Yeah.
thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank
Yep.
you so much for having me, guys.
all right, thanks a lot.
Bye, everybody.
Have a good night.
Everybody.
Thanks, everybody.